A cold wind howled at 10,000 feet as a lone figure stood at the rear doorway of a Boeing 727. The night of November 24th, 1971, was pitch black below, just the outline of Washington's dense forests visible through clouds. Clutching a canvas bag filled with $200,000 in cash, the man coolly tightened a parachute to his back. Then, without another word, he stepped off the plane's lowered rear stairway and vanished into the darkness. In that instant, a criminal legend was born. This was no movie stunt. It was the real-life escapade of the mysterious hijacker known as D.B. Cooper, perpetrator of the only unsolved airplane hijacking in U.S. history. The world below had no idea that a man was literally dropping out of the sky and into decades of myth. To understand how he got to this point, we need to rewind to the beginning of the story. What events led an unidentified man in a suit to jump from a jetliner in the middle of a stormy night? And how did he manage to outfox the FBI and vanish without a trace? Let's go back to earlier that day when an unassuming stranger walked into an airport and into history. It was the afternoon before Thanksgiving, 1971, at Portland International Airport. A nondescript middle-aged man in a dark suit and tie approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He paid $20 cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305 to Seattle, a short 30-minute trip. On the ticket, he gave the name Dan Cooper. He looked utterly ordinary, mid-40s dark hair, average build. Carrying a briefcase, the man boarded the Boeing 727 and settled into seat 18E, near the rear of the aircraft. Shortly after takeoff at 2:50 p.m., as Flight 305 ascended into gray skies, the man ordered a bourbon and soda, calm as could be. But just after 3 p.m., events took a drastic turn. He wordlessly handed a folded note to a flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, who was seated nearby. Initially, she slipped the note into her pocket, assuming it was the routine overture of a businessman. The man leaned toward her and spoke softly. "Miss, you'd better have a look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note with trembling hands. In neat letters, the passenger had written that he had a bomb in his briefcase and instructions for the crew. Her heart pounding, the stunned stewardess did as instructed and sat beside him. Cooper cracked open the briefcase just enough for her to glimpse a tangled array of wires and red cylinders inside. It looked every bit like a bomb. In a calm, low voice, the stranger dictated his demands: $200,000 in cash, all in $20 bills, for parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane upon arrival. Over the next tense minutes, Flight 305's pilots relayed the hijacker's demands to air traffic control and law enforcement. The passengers remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding at the back of the plane. They were told only that a minor mechanical issue was forcing them to circle above Seattle. And circle they did. For about 2 hours, the airliner looped in sky over Puget Sound, giving authorities time to gather the ransom money and parachutes as instructed. Down on the ground, FBI agents and Seattle police scrambled to procure the cash that would total 10,000 $20 bills and 4 parachutes from a local skydiving school. The atmosphere on board was eerily calm. Cooper showed no sign of panic or anger. Witnesses later described him as polite, even kind. He even paid for his drink and offered to request meals for the flight crew in Seattle. At 5:45 p.m., Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle, taxiing to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac away from the terminal. Night had fallen. By then, FBI agents had assembled a ransom and parachutes, and one agent, dressed as an airline employee, carried a white canvas bag filled with cash to the plane. Following instructions, only a single airline manager approached the jet to avoid any perceived threat. He handed over the $200,000 and parachutes to a flight attendant via the rear stairs. Inside, the hijacker inspected his haul. Remarkably, he seemed satisfied. In exchange, he kept his word. Cooper released all 36 passengers unharmed in Seattle once the ransom was delivered. 2 flight attendants also disembarked to safety. Only 4 crew members remained with Cooper: the pilot, co-pilot, a flight engineer, and 1 senior flight attendant, a brave woman named Tina Mucklow, whom Cooper had asked to stay. With the money and parachutes now aboard, one might expect the ordeal to end. But D.B. Cooper had other plans. He ordered the crew back into the sky. Specifically, he instructed the pilots to chart a course southward toward Mexico City, flying low at 10,000 feet and below 200 knots, and importantly, to keep the rear exit door unlocked and the aft staircase extended once airborne. The pilots argued that taking off with the rear stairway down was unsafe. Cooper relented on that detail, allowing them to close it for takeoff as long as they showed him how to lower it mid-flight. He also had a peculiar request: fly with the landing gear down and wing flaps set at 15 degrees, creating maximum drag. Clearly, Cooper was planning something daring. Around 7:40 p.m., the Boeing 727 lifted off from Seattle into the rainy night, headed generally toward Reno, Nevada, as a planned refueling stop. On board, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. The remaining crew were now essentially hostages accompanying a man about to leap into the unknown. As Flight 305 lumbered south through rough weather, two F-106 fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby Air Force base to shadow the airliner at a safe distance. Another military aircraft, a training jet, also tailed from afar. Despite this aerial pursuit, not one pilot had eyes on Cooper in the stormy darkness. Inside the 727, Cooper busily prepared for his escape. He instructed Tina Mucklow to help him lower the rear staircase. When she expressed fear of being sucked out of the plane, he surprisingly reassured her. He handed Mucklow a set of instructions for the pilots and allowed her to join the others in the cockpit for safety. Before she closed the cockpit door behind her, Tina took one last glance. She saw the hijacker tying the money bag around his waist with cords cut from a parachute. He had also slipped on a pair of dark wraparound goggles. Tina Mucklow would be the last person to ever see Dan Cooper. At approximately 8 p.m., a warning light blinked in the cockpit, indicating the rear air stair had been deployed mid-flight. The crew felt a noticeable change in cabin pressure, the telltale sign that the door at the back of the plane was now open to the sky. The pilot used the intercom to ask if Cooper needed any help. A one-word reply came back: no. Those would be the final words anyone ever heard from D.B. Cooper. Around 8:13 p.m., the plane's tail suddenly lurched upward, as if the weight at the back had abruptly gone missing. The pilots had to struggle to level the aircraft. They knew what this likely meant. Cooper had jumped. Somewhere over southwestern Washington, in the cold and pouring rain, this enigmatic man dove into the night with a parachute and the sack of money strapped to him. The crew anxiously awaited any sign of their unwanted passenger, but he was gone. When Flight 305 eventually landed in Reno a couple of hours later, FBI agents swarmed the jet, only to confirm what the crew already suspected: Cooper had vanished. The rear stairway was still open. The hijacker and his loot were nowhere to be found. All that remained on board was a black clip-on tie he'd removed and a mother-of-pearl tie clip left on his seat. The legend of D.B. Cooper was now well and truly airborne. On the ground, law enforcement mobilized immediately. They had a general idea of the jump time, and thus a broad search area, dense forests, mountains, and rivers north of the Portland area. That night, and over the coming days, teams of FBI agents and sheriff's deputies combed the wilderness in the suspected drop zone. They were looking for parachutes, shredded money, any sign of the mysterious skyjacker. Helicopters and planes flew grid patterns overhead, scanning for disturbances in the trees or a parachute canopy snagged in branches. But incredibly, nothing was found. It was as if D.B. Cooper had evaporated into thin air along with the $200,000 ransom. If you're finding yourself hooked by this mystery, now's a great time to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We dive into intriguing true stories like this one all the time, and your support helps us keep going with more deep dive content. In the aftermath of Cooper's disappearance, the FBI launched one of the most exhaustive manhunts in U.S. history. They code-named the case Norjack for Northwest hijacking. Agents interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, everyone from the flight crew and passengers to local residents along the suspected flight path. They collected evidence from a plane, over 60 fingerprints, Cooper's left-behind black J.C. Penney clip-on tie, a clip, and 2 of the parachutes, one he left behind, and one reserve chute he'd opened to use its cords. Leads poured in from all over the country as news of the daredevil skyjacker captivated the public. Right away, eyewitness descriptions gave investigators a rough profile. Cooper was a white male in his mid-40s, around 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, with close-cropped dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a business suit and sunglasses. Using these details, the FBI produced composite sketches that were circulated nationwide. The sketches, showing a man with a receding hairline and impassive expression, became iconic images of the unknown hijacker. Within the first 5 years, the FBI considered more than 800 suspects and eliminated all but few dozen of them. By the time the active investigation was suspended in 2016, that suspect list had grown to over 1,000 serious candidates investigated. Early on, anyone with skydiving experience or criminal record in the Northwest seemed to get a look. Army paratroopers, troubled Vietnam vets, petty criminals, stuntmen. The FBI checked out countless leads, yet none quite fit all the puzzle pieces of the Cooper case. One key question fueled the search: did D.B. Cooper even survive the jump? From day one, agents theorized that Cooper might have perished on that rainy night in 1971. Why? For starters, he jumped into a frigid rainstorm over rough terrain in the dark. The parachute he chose was an older model military parachute that couldn't be steered. Basically, he had little control over where he'd land. In fact, among the 4 parachutes he was given, one was a non-functional training chute, sewn shut as a safety for classroom use. Unwittingly, Cooper took that dummy chute as his reserve, meaning he effectively leapt with only one working parachute. His clothing was a suit and loafers, hardly ideal for trekking out of a wild forest landing. Taken together, these facts suggest that if Cooper wasn't an expert, he faced very long odds of a safe landing. This theory got a boost nearly 9 years later, in February 1980. A young boy digging along the Columbia River's sandy shoreline on a beach called Tennabar made a shocking discovery: 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills buried in the sand. The tattered money totaled $5,800 and matched the serial numbers of the Cooper ransom, proof that at least some Cooper's cash ended up in the river downstream from the suspected jump area. Investigators were baffled and intrigued. How did the money get there? The most likely explanation was that it had been submerged in the elements for years, slowly washing downstream. This find seemed to hint that Cooper might not have made out alive. Perhaps the money in Cooper's body fell into the water or were buried in mud, with a portion later washing up on the bank. However, even this clue raised new questions. The location of the money was well north of the projected flight path, and some experts argue it could have been carried by river currents from a different area. Regardless, no other ransom cash has ever turned up in circulation or in the wild. Despite intensive searches of the surrounding riverbed where the cash was found, divers and agents found no further trace of Cooper or the remaining $194,000. To this day, the buried bundles on Tennabar remain the only recovered ransom money. It was an enticing clue, but ultimately a dead end in identifying the hijacker's fate. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, with no body and no definitive evidence of Cooper's death, public fascination turned increasingly to theories and suspects. If he did survive, who could he be? And if he didn't, why hadn't his remains been found? What followed was an outpouring of tips, hoaxes, and rampant speculation, some of it credible, much of it not. The FBI publicly stated that they believed Cooper likely did not survive the jump, but they continued to chase down leads regardless. The mystery had taken on a life of its own. Over the years, amateur sleuths and FBI agents alike have dug into countless theories about D.B. Cooper's identity and fate. Let's explore a few of the most credible suspects and hypotheses that have kept this case alive, all while avoiding the wilder tales of secret identities or UFO abductions. These are grounded theories that real investigators have seriously considered, minus the sensationalism. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. Perhaps the most famous suspect, McCoy was an Army veteran and avid skydiver who, astonishingly, carried out a copycat hijacking just 5 months after Cooper's jump. In April 1972, McCoy hijacked a plane, demanded $500,000, and escaped via parachute in very similar fashion. He even used the rear stairs of a 727, just like Cooper. When McCoy was caught by the FBI, agents noted many similarities to the Cooper case, sparking suspicions that McCoy was Cooper simply striking again. McCoy had the right skills, military paratrooper training, and a resemblance to the composite sketch. However, there were also differences. McCoy was much younger, 29, and according to flight attendants, did not match Cooper's face or build closely enough. The FBI eventually ruled McCoy out because of those description mismatches and evidence placing him elsewhere on the night of the Cooper hijacking. Intriguingly, just recently in 2022, investigators unearthed a parachute hidden in a North Carolina attic that belonged to McCoy's family. The FBI is analyzing it to see if it could possibly be linked to the Cooper jump. McCoy's own children have believed their father was D.B. Cooper, so this theory, while unproven, remains one of the more compelling possibilities. Kenneth Peter Christensen, a relatively low-profile suspect until a 2007 book drew attention to him, Christensen was a former paratrooper and a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, the same airline Cooper hijacked, who lived in Washington state. He was 45 in 1971, around Cooper's age, and reportedly loved bourbon and smoking cigarettes, just like Cooper did on the flight. Years after the crime, Christensen's own brother said Kenneth had once made a deathbed confession about something to do with an airplane, which raised eyebrows. Investigators digging into his past found some intriguing circumstantial evidence. For example, not long after the hijacking, Christensen paid off his mortgage and had some unexplained money. Notably, flight attendant Florence Schaffner, the first crew member who interacted with Cooper, later said photos of Christensen resembled her memory of Cooper more than other suspects. Despite the coincidences, the FBI couldn't find any hard evidence. They maintained that Christensen was shorter and lighter than witness descriptions of Cooper, and that none of the ransom money ever turned up in his accounts. Without a confession or direct proof, Christensen remains a tantalizing maybe, but the FBI never named him a prime suspect. Sheridan Peterson. Peterson was an interesting character, a Marine veteran and experienced smoke jumper, forest firefighter, who parachutes into wildfires, who worked for Boeing in the late 1960s. He was in his mid-40s in 1971 and looked enough like the composite sketch that some co-workers jokingly called him D.B. Cooper. He also had the know-how to execute such a jump. For years, internet sleuths and even some FBI agents eyed Peterson as a top suspect. He himself played coy with reporters, at one point saying, "I could have been the hijacker," with a smile, then denying it. Peterson had an alibi. He claimed he was in Nepal at the time of the hijacking, and the FBI never found solid evidence tying him to the crime. He passed away in 2021, still maintaining he wasn't Cooper, but for many who track a case, he was as close to a real-life Cooper candidate as one could find. Which theory or suspect do you find most convincing? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious which explanation you think holds the most weight. Was Cooper a skilled skydiver who got away, or an unlucky daredevil who didn't survive the night? While suspects come and go, the foundational mystery remains. We simply don't know who D.B. Cooper was, nor what ultimately became of him. The FBI officially closed its active investigation in 2016, acknowledging that all leads had been exhausted. However, they invited the public to send in any physical evidence that might surface, like a found parachute or bundles of cash. Enthusiasts and independent researchers have kept at it, hosting annual CooperCon conventions and chasing down every clue with almost obsessive dedication. Every few years, a new piece of evidence or a new suspect makes headlines, like the recent parachute find on the McCoy family property. But so far, none of these have cracked the case. D.B. Cooper remains a one-of-a-kind enigma. It's been over 53 years since that cold November night, and D.B. Cooper's legend is still very much alive. In the Pacific Northwest, the story has become a mix of folklore and Sherlock Holmes-style whodunit. There's a certain romantic outlaw aura around Cooper, the gentleman hijacker who was polite, never hurt anyone, and pulled off a Hollywood-worthy caper. His exploit has inspired movies, songs, and untold number of amateur detectives convinced they'll be the one to solve it. Yet at its core, the Cooper case endures because it hits that perfect sweet spot of mystery, a bold crime, an escape that seems impossibly successful, and just enough breadcrumbs to tease us without revealing the truth. Standing today, we are left with tantalizing questions. Did D.B. Cooper walk away from his risky stunt, laughing to himself as he slipped into obscurity with a small fortune? Or did he meet a grim fate in the woods with only waterlogged $20 bills to hint at his demise? The FBI's stance is that he likely didn't survive, given the evidence. But without a body, definitive proof remains elusive. As one agent famously put it, there's something about this case that just won't let go. And indeed, the case beckons to every new generation of sleuths. Will we ever get an answer? Perhaps one day a hiker will stumble upon a weathered parachute or a hidden stash of ransom bills in the woods, or some long-held confession will come to light. Until then, we're left with our theories and the enduring image of that mysterious man in dark glasses, leaping off the air stair into oblivion. The story of D.B. Cooper continues to captivate and confound, a testament to the human love of a good mystery. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the D.B. Cooper saga. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, please give this video a thumbs up and consider sharing it with fellow mystery-loving friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing tales of true crime and the unexplained. Who knows, maybe together we'll unravel the next great mystery. Until next time, stay curious.